switching gears a little bit, of course, we want to talk about Overwatch, but also, I guess, soon to be Overwatch 2. And not just...
You guess? I hope so.
And I guess we can also expect that to happen, maybe not by the time this will be released, but maybe soonish after. Now, there are still some hypotheticals left. And I guess one big one is what you expect to transfer over in like transferable skills from like Overwatch 1 players into Overwatch 2, and how much overlap there you expect there to be. Because theoretically speaking, this is a question that a lot of general managers had to ask themselves when they spent their money this offseason. Is there any like doubt in you that like some of the best players will remain the best players in the world even after Overwatch 2 hits?
I think I'm a bit of an optimist in that regard. I think that most of the skills will actually transfer quite seamlessly, and there's just like some fundamental ideas you have to rethink and readapt to. That is obviously going to take some time. Like, for example, if you play some main tank composition 5v5 and you just like lose your diva and you lose your defense matrix, that is obviously going to fundamentally change the way you peel for your supports and take care of your flex supports, because you don't have that backup off tank to help up the backline. So I think there are a lot of that stuff that situations players will have to encounter and reshape their compositions and the way they navigate those kind of situations. But I think fundamentally, I think you're going to see a lot of things remain the same. I think at first we might see a bit some extremist compositions where either you're like full dive or either you're like full peel, because I think the lack of an off tank is really going to help you navigate situational circumstances. Like our composition is very well rounded, we can take some space and control space. I think it's going to be harder to see those kind of compositions without like Zarya bubbles and that the frontline pressure that she brings, or like defense matrices and the ability to like reduce damage taken, a Sigma second shield, etc. So I think fundamentally we'll see a lot of the same concepts be regurgitated in Overwatch 2. And I don't think there will be a much of a difference in that regard. I think if anything, the game will be more volatile. So maybe you want to rely more on mechanical skill. But as your question was, like, if I was a general manager, I'd honestly just look to put together the most mechanically good team I possibly could and try to figure out hero pools somewhere around there. I don't think that any team has a perfect hero pool as well. I think that's quite an ambitious goal to just be like, we're going to be really good on every hero in this single game. Like, at some point you sort of have to make trade-offs, whether that's like not having a perfect Sombra player, not having a perfect Mei player, not having the best Tracer player, because there's only so many. But overall, I'd expect much to remain the same. Because this is an interesting question for me as well as an analyst. Like, if I work for the Overwatch League this upcoming year, then I'll have to figure out how to analyze that game in a different way than I have Overwatch 1, right? Because the game is going to be different. So I think there will be some fundamental ideas that remain the same for the most part. Yeah.
Now, I guess like when you try to frame this in your mind or like think about this, you must have like an idea of what you think will be in this pre-patch, right? And I
don't have an idea. Make that clear.
But there's like a wide range of possibilities that it could be, and I guess like there's certain probabilities that you probably assign towards each. Like, I guess we expect this to be 5v5. This is like a 99.95% chance that will happen. Close to 100%. And then, like, other stuff, like, for instance, hero reworks is very likely. But what else do you think or would expect to be in there? Are we just getting one hero in Sojourn? Or are we getting more heroes directly? Are we getting just push, or are we getting this nebulous other game mode? Are we getting more maps? Like, what do you expect from this first patch that we're getting?
That's such a tough question. It really is, because to some level you're just like, oh, it's going to be an Overwatch beta, alpha, whatever iteration it is. It's going to being the developers trying out the game. They're going to test the game, and we'll have the opportunity to test it. But then you get conflicting information, like was it that journalist or whoever who was like, yeah, Diablo and Overwatch is totally not being released in 2022. There's no way these games are being released this year. And I'm like sitting here, we're recording in March, and I'm just like, so like, there's no way we're getting the full game 9 months before it releases, or that's if it was released January 1st, which it probably isn't. I don't think that's the date people mark around the calendar. You're just like, yeah, let's release a AAA game on January 1st. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yes.
So it's not going to be the full game. They've said that we're not bringing back Assault, I think, right? Mm-hmm. So, hopefully push us in there to replace a game mode. Otherwise, we'll just do payload maps and control.
Wouldn't mind that.
Okay, all right, fair enough. It'd be better than the alternative. It was bring back Assault. I mean, that'd be a heel turn, if anything. Just like, sorry, Overwatch fans. That'd be like, at this point, just like competitive, waking up, browsing competitive Overwatch, and just like, sources, they're bringing back Assault for 2022. Like, oh my god, something would break in the system. Like, that would be incredible. So I mean, I hope that pushes in there. As for heroes, I mean, if it's just 5 versus 5 with like the basic heroes and hopefully like Sojourn in there, like at that point, I think I'd be satisfied. I feel like with such a long time until the game actually is being released, from the information we've heard from journalists, etc., there has to be some kind of like some kind of content phase where like you release a little bit of content to try each time. I have no idea what maps are going to be in there. If anything, worst case scenario, I hope it's Overwatch 1 with 5v5, and improved graphics that excite some things, and maybe we get a Sojourn and another map in there.
Right. Now, before we go on with the hypotheticals, there's one thing, I guess, about the last season I wanted to probe you on. And, I mean, you had one of the most memorable rants in favor of a player or in defense of a player of all time, which turned into a great copy paste as well. Of course, like talking about Rascal and him being continuously underrated. Is there like a player in season 4 you thought like was done as dirty as Rascal was in season 3 about like his play?
Ooh, kind of putting me on the spot here. You need to help me out here. Can we run through a few examples?
Sure.
At least. Okay. I think the first name that comes to mind that could be a candidate would probably be like Fitz from Soul Dynasty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think he sometimes gets mentioned in the the DPS conversations, like who are the best DPS players. At the same time, I don't even think if like I don't know if you could call Fitz like a top tier DPS player. He's like on the cusp of like really good, and like every team would be happy to have him kind of thing. Who was criminally underrated? Atlanta, like Hawk and Pelican, that were talked about quite enough. It's a tough one. Do you have any that you've thought of?
Nothing really springs to mind. Like when
Masa's a good one, to be honest.
Yeah, Masa I think was probably not talked about enough. Honestly, like probably one of the best main supports last season.
Yeah.
But when I saw the MVP nominations, for instance, I think for the first time didn't have to feel a way about the eventual winners. I think they were all justified this time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough question. The thing about it as well is, I guess, because I worked the entire season on the desk. There are so many freaking matches that we're just bound to talk about every single player in the league at some point. Like there will be like story droughts where you're just like, well, it's the Summer Showdown qualifiers, and we haven't talked about Bebe a single time of the Washington Justice, and you just like find a reason to talk about this guy to shine a light on him. So it's hard for me to really come up with a name that stands out to that degree. I guess I'd say Fitz then. I'm sure, hopefully in the comments, that someone mentions one name that's that really stood out in that way. But I don't know. Do you think Flora was talked about enough, considering how good it was on
Probably not. Even though I think like the Scrimbucks were pretty high preseason.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you were New York Scrimbucks early on. Yeah.
Very true. Okay, this might sound like pandering, but I honestly believe this. I think Alarm wasn't talked about enough.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Like,
yeah,
that's definitely a player that was still outstanding, but just like unfortunately the team couldn't deliver to that same level for at least for the majority of the season. But yeah, I think overall it's actually a pretty good omen that we're not underrating anyone, and if anything, probably the overrating was a little bit more a problem this season.
I don't think that's a rant I want to go on. Like, what player is the most overrated? I think that would do all kinds of wrong things to my credibility. If there's anything I've learned being an analyst in Overwatch for so long, is that you get infinitely more praise and followers and attention if you just praise people all the time and you talk good about players all the time. But as soon as you go into like Shannon Sharp sports stuff and just like criticize people and stir up drama, I think it's way harder. So, and you get way more shit tossed your way. So I've learned to sort of stay out of that. Although I have some pretty spicy and mean things coming up this season. I shouldn't have said that. Jesus Christ. I've been studying going into the season, and I do it on stream. And I sometimes don't say this on stream, but sometimes I'll just by like reviewing matches and teams and players, and I'll write down takes. I'll write down future takes, and I have a take folder that I don't tell anyone about. I have some pretty spicy takes that I'll just unleash whenever I feel like it. So I'm looking forward to do that. I think to wrap up the underrated conversation, there was one player that appeared in my mind, and then now I forgot about it when I was about to say it. Oh yeah, I mean, I guess because Gargoyle hasn't been picked up, that's a player that I really like, and I really enjoyed watching Gargoyle, particularly like when he has at his best on Sigma. I just think he's an amazing off tank to follow and watch. So the fact that he's not even in the league going into this year, that just like crushes me. That's soul crushing.
Yeah, I think maybe if I wanted to stretch a little further, I guess I could also mention like Krong and Choicy One. Those were like two players that.
Do you think Krong is underrated?
Probably not this season, I think, but Krong and Gargoyle are similar players to me in my mind. Just on the qualities that they have. But I think Choicy One, generally speaking, probably would have been a top player in the league had he been on a top team.
Yeah, we're doing the Plat Chat team previews, and we're releasing a Guangzhou episode this week. So it might even be out by the time this interview is posted. Mm-hmm. I was not kind. I kind of really, really feel bad. I was too harsh. But, at the same time, that's my job, I tell people what's good, and I tell people what's bad. And for Guangzhou and their tank line and their roster, it was not kind this time around this year. I apologize. Yep. But that's how it has to be.
Right. Now, let's go a little...
Choice One, though, is good. Sorry. Choice One, though, is good. I like Choice One. There you go.
Sweet. Now, let's go a little bit into the hypotheticals, especially like about next season. But I guess as a starting point, I kind of want to still refer to the last season, but in a different way. So imagine you meet a traveler from a parallel universe, and they step to you and go like, the Los Angeles Gladiators have actually won the Overwatch League. What would you expect to be different about that universe, that parallel universe, than to ours in which that clearly didn't happen? And they, yes, they got a stage title, but they obviously weren't a dominant team over the year, and probably, it's fair to say, didn't get close to the title either. So what do you think would have to be different about that universe?
Ooh. See, it's interesting because I mean, they did lose to Atlanta 2-3. That was like about as close as it gets. And I think they had a really good rivalry all year, really, those two teams. And when you take things into consideration, like Atlanta Reign, they got second place. I mean, they beat the Dallas Fuel. So the Gladiators really one map win away. I mean, that's so nice for me to say this because they didn't beat Dallas Fuel. From being in the finals. Like Gladiators, if they beat Atlanta there and if they play Dallas under the same circumstances, I think you and me can both agree that Dallas in that Atlanta series, they just like looked demoralized to some degree. They didn't play their best game. And I don't mean to discredit Atlanta Reign for taking them down, but I still think that it was, I'd like to see that series replayed 10 times just to see how many times Atlanta wins and how many times Dallas wins. But the Gladiators, I think they were kind of close still. Who did Atlanta beat afterwards? After they beat?
They went the entire gauntlet of NA, I think.
Oh yeah, San Francisco. They beat San Francisco as well. Yeah, which was another interesting series. What would have been different? I mean, I really liked Gladiators going into this playoffs. Riding a high from their Stage 4 championship. They stood out to me as a team that only really played the same style that Shanghai did. And they played it really well because they have players like Space and Shu and Kevster, Birdring, like the really good roster. I really like that roster. So, what would have been different? I mean, parallel universe. Maybe you upgrade the tank position, the main tank position, a little bit instead of Muse. Like he was a rookie going into the season, and meanwhile, all the other teams they have Super Fate and Gator, who's one of the best Reinhardts and Orisas in the entire league. Fearless. So like when you stack up Muse being a rookie for the Gladiators up against all those main tanks, on the other side of the bracket you had Chengdu with Gaga, who was also a rookie, but I think almost like universally more hyped going into the league than Muse. But besides that point, I think Gladiators were really prime for like a good playoff run. And they ended up losing that Atlanta Reign series. I think it would have been very possible for Gladiators to reach that final had they, taken down the Atlanta Reign. And then it's just a matter of, who pops off in that Shanghai series. Obviously, I think Shanghai are still massively favored head-to-head against the Gladiators because they're just so much better as a team and individually, despite of how good Gladiators roster is. But in my mind, like they would have at least put up a fight. It wouldn't have been a 4-0 grand finals in my mind. It could have been like 4-1, 4-2. And at that point, there's a lot of what ifs here. A lot of at that point, a lot of generosity being thrown around here by me. But I still think they would have been one of the only teams to be able to play the Senyara kind of style against Shanghai Dragons. And if it had been any given Sunday, if it had been their kind of day, and they just would have woken up feeling 10% better at Overwatch, I genuinely think they could have been very close to taking down Shanghai in that grand final. So there's a lot of what ifs there. There are a lot of generosity from either, and obviously they didn't. They got 56. They didn't, even get to the top 4. But in hindsight, I think if you look back at the 2021 playoffs, I think the Gladiators are going to stand out as one of those teams that I think underperformed relative to how good they actually were. And I think if you actually spoke to teams at Hawaii and the players participating, just like they really respected the Gladiators, they thought they were really good. It just ended up not being their playoffs, and they could have, at least won 2 more matches in my mind.
Okay, let me go on a little bit of a tangent here, because I think what you said is like maybe upgrade the main tank position. Of course, like you brought up the rookie quality of Muse. Now, in some sense, Mag, and maybe not to the same extent, but sort of close, Mag felt like what Proper is now perceived for Season 5, right? Like,
Mag, you mean like as hyped going into it?
Hyped going into it.
Yeah.
Like, that was the prime rookie to sign. Like, whoever got that probably won the off-season. Did Mag disappoint last season?
Did Mag disappoint? I don't think... I mean, I think the biggest disappointment, and like in hindsight, we the viewers, the fans of the league, we extrapolate so much of our perceived value of how good Mag was based on his wrecking ball play, because that was what he played a lot, during those very troubling Sombra times when Assassin, had the yips and he couldn't figure out how to play Sombra at all. And I think he took some. I mean, Mag, he wasn't the greatest wrecking ball in the world by any means, but I think those performances in particular really stand out to us, and it's what we remember when we think about Mag. But when we consider like his Reinhardt, his Winston, I think he was, a fantastic main tank in the league, Mag. So I think going into this year, the wrecking ball thing is obviously going to worry me. But overall, I don't think necessarily was his fault that Washington Justice fell short either. So I have a lot of respect for Mag, but it just so happened that his wrecking ball really wasn't that good, and his team just fell apart, which is something I don't think individually you can slander him for.
Right. Now, speaking of rookies, it feels like in terms of the hype coming in, I don't think anyone had as much hype coming into their rookie season as Proper had. Just comparatively, it feels like that's now the win condition to unlock in order to like get closer to the trophy. I think some got close. We talked about Mac. We probably talked about Alarm before. Haxal was definitely a big one. I guess you could say Decay to some degree, even though that probably wasn't the signing of that season at the time, but still very, very good player. Like, let's time travel into November this year.
Okay. Is Overwatch 2 out?
Overwatch 2 is out. We played the entire season. What kind of a world would we have to be living in order for Proper to not get Rookie of the Season?
Wow, that's tough. I mean, we haven't done our Plat Chat team preview yet of San Francisco Shock, but I am very hyped about the Shock, just like everyone else, really. You know, if you've been a fan of San Francisco Shock in the past, or if you've been a fan of O2 Blast in the past, and you're like, oh, this is going to be my take this year. This is going to be my rendition of Avril clutching on to Leave last year, you know? Like when early on, Avril was just like, Leave is the greatest thing in the world. He's the next coming of Christ. I love this man. He's going to be MVP. If you go into this season thinking that your equivalent to that is going to be Shock, you know, doing really well this year, I'm sorry to break it to you. Everyone thinks Shock is going to do really well this year. Everyone actually has a ton of respect for Finn, Kilo, and Proper. Which is a nice change up, honestly, because I think in the past, like, people have generally like not respected contenders players being promoted as much. But it just so happens that this year it feels like there's a ton of contenders players coming in, a ton of rookies coming in, that people are just like, they're going to change the way we, you know, look at the Overwatch League. They're going to change the Overwatch League landscape and how teams are rated. So obviously I have with that, I think Proper is universally agreed upon as the best rookie coming into the league at this point. But I guess we don't know what we're going to see from Shock as a whole. Obviously, we're going into a new game. It's 5 versus 5. Maybe they can't figure out some of the dynamics of the game. I think when you look at the people who remained in the roster, like Violet and Super, you know, I don't think you can get much better in terms of like a well-rounded main tank going into a game where you probably need your main tank to flex to Zarya, Diva, etc. Super does that incredibly well. You have Violet, who was a runner-up MVP candidate in 2020 to Fleta. So ironclad members of this year's San Francisco Shock roster. But if something were to go wrong, and if their team wasn't to perform up to expectations for whatever regions, maybe it even is so that like the Western region is just like very competitive. And despite the contenders talent coming into the Shock squad, there's just like so many teams fighting for the top spots. Where that's like, you know, Dallas Fuel improving upon their roster. Whether that's like, you know, Atlanta Reign. I'm obviously blanking on the top dogs, the Gladiators. Just like spending more and more money. Maybe it is that, San Francisco Shock, they actually pull off a similar year to this year. They compete for the stage playoff spots, or like the regional stages playoff spots, but like they can't quite get there. They can't quite secure like top 2, top 3. I think at that point, you have to start looking at like rookies on some of those actual top teams who are actually competing for the championships, actually competing for the stage titles. And I think there are some teams who have added some really good rookies to the roster, whether you're like the Dallas Fuel or the Chengdu Hunters. I'll say Chengdu because I respect someone like Alpha Yi quite a lot. I obviously not on the level of Proper at all, but let's say Chengdu Hunters, they win a stage. They end up beating Shanghai Dragons in a regional playoffs or whatever because of like the meta shift or whatever reason. it could be whatever. At that point, Alpha E is a stage title holder. No, wait, sorry. Am I confusing? Yeah, sorry, I'm confusing Alpha E and
I would have.
Aprita. Yeah, sorry. They both start with A. And we both covered Hangzhou and Chengdu this year. Sorry, yeah. So Aprita, like if Aprita ends up winning a stage with Chengdu this year, then you're just like, well, Aprita's already a great player, a great Tiscan player coming into this league. He's playing next to Leave, who's the reigning MVP champion. And I think if you look at the accolades and achievements, and this is obviously something we did a lot when Awesome Platchat and you as well did your top 10 players of all time articles. Like, how much do you rate accolades and achievements? Like, how much does that feature into a player's individual resume? Because they all contribute differently in that regard. So I think if Proper weren't to win it, I think you'd have to look at some of those top teams and just be like, is there any rookie here that stands out that has actually amassed some kind of team success? I think someone like Aprita could definitely be in the running to take Proper's Rookie of the Year crown.
Second part of our interview with Reinforce is done. Now, I told you last time this was going to be a long boy. So for the third one, we talked to him about further hypotheticals, like who's going to be the GOAT in 5 years' time, which is a bit of a different debate than who's the GOAT right now, sort of projecting who's hot right now and who looks to be great for the next couple of years as well. We talked to him about main tank woes and which role, either off-tank or main tank, will adapt to Overwatch 2 better as it looks. We talked to him about, of course, the amazing Prodigy Proper and what it's going to be like having him in the league. And Reinforce has a contemplative moment about how he structures his work-life balance and what he found out about himself in comparison to his peers. Now, if you want to stay tuned to that, hit like, subscribe, and the bell notification for all things Overwatch with GGRecon.